So my name is Ross Young, and I've had a very fun career in cybersecurity. I've been in a little over 15 years, and I'm excited to share with you why most cybersecurity budgets go to waste. Has anybody ever thought about this question? Like, we're spending a lot of money. Last year, we probably spent less money, so we should have all security done now, right? I wish. I wish. So, a little bit about myself. I've spent over 15 years in cybersecurity. Probably the most prominent piece here is this logo right here at the Central Intelligence Agency. I was there for 10 and a half years. I was a nation state actor, had fun breaking into banks. I also worked at the Federal Reserve, securing our banks, worked at Capital One, securing our banks. And I also spent time at Caterpillar Financial, where I was the CISO over a bank for 4 years. And most recently, I spent a year at a place called Team 8, which is an Israeli venture capital doing cybersecurity startups. And right now, where I focus is on CISO Tradecraft, which is a free podcast where anybody can go and listen and learn. It's on YouTube, it's on Spotify, to learn how to become a CISO or how to become a better CISO. So it's a bunch of free content that I put out, and you're going to see a lot of it today here as well. All right. So I started thinking about this problem of how do we optimize every dollar spent in cybersecurity so much that I decided to write the book on it. So if you guys have ideas that you're thinking too, I'm happy to give recommendations on how to write your own book afterwards, but anybody can do this. But I think what you're going to find in here are some really interesting things going forward. Now, first of all, how many of you guys are in a cybersecurity leadership role where you actually have to itemize all the items that cyber's doing? Okay, good number. Great number here. Love it. So when we start going down this route, what you're going to see is, all right, there we go. I got these things disappearing. There's a couple different ways organizations usually try to baseline themselves in the industry. This is a study here from IANS, and they may have just even updated this document for 2026, but this is the one from 2025. And what companies do is they benchmark themselves against two large metrics. One is security as a percentage of IT spend, or security as a percentage of annual revenue. So this is really helpful. You can typically go to SEC records and kind of look to see how much this is. So if I was, Optiv or GuidePoint, I would kind of have like a high level number to see where companies are usually spending. Yeah. Excellent.
For some reason, the books online, it's just showing us truncated.
Okay. Can you see it better now? Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for helping with that. So when you look at this, this is a good starting point. But I would tell you this is probably where you want to be at a max dollar spend. Because if the industry spends 10% and you can actually build an amazing cyber program for 8%, you're creating, 2% competitive advantage for your company. And what you're going to hear me say over and over and over again, cybersecurity is the business of revenue protection, right? It makes no sense to spend $100 to save a $10 bill, right? And every dollar we save, you give it back to the company, and then they can make more profit for the investors in the company. And I think that's a really important thing here. So when you go and you look across this here, what you're going to notice is there's certain industries that are highly regulated that are going to spend more in cybersecurity. And generally, the bigger the company, you start to see what's called economies of scale. So cyber starts becoming cheaper because you can just do it at a larger enterprise scale. Now, another metric to look at besides cost of revenue or as a percentage of revenue or as a percentage of IT is the cost per employee. And this study here comes from Gartner. So if you're wondering how much everybody is going and spending in cybersecurity here, the average is $709 per employee. That doesn't sound like that much to me. right? And especially if you're an organization and you're buying like 50 tools, right? You got your DLP, your email security, your EDR, and you start going through that list of acronyms. $709 is kind of tough to do, especially if you're a small business, right? But these are some good numbers just to kind of understand where things are. And another way I like to maybe rephrase this, when people are saying, well, what's the risk appetite of our company? $709 per employee on cybersecurity. That's the risk appetite. So just a different way to kind of start thinking about things at a higher level. All right. So now when we go into cybersecurity and you look at my definition before I start diving in and showing you how to use all these tools, I like to use the frame that cybersecurity is the business of revenue protection. And within cybersecurity, there's really two overarching goals. One is risk reduction and one is compliance. And they are not the same thing. It's important you understand their differences because the way we're going to spend debate based on the activities is very different. For compliance, we should spend a minimum viable amount, right? If audit says you have to do this thing, I do only the things they ask me to do. Do I make any extra money if I give them twice the paperwork? No, I've lost time and effort to actually go and do that, right? So you really want to just check off the compliance requirements. Now, risk reduction, totally different game. This is how we keep our company safe from being hacked or breached, right? Here, I actually want to buy the best solutions available to me at my price points, right? So here I'm going low cost, here I'm going best product. And if you do that, it really helps you drive your budget in a way where you can maximize value, right? And so this is another really important concept before we start digging into and looking at how to do some of the budgets. Yeah, next slide, please. So the first thing of why cybersecurity spending goes bad is because we prioritize everything the same way. And if all your priorities are the same and you have 200 priorities, you don't have priorities, right? And so this is the first thing we have to really go and understand. And a simple way to maybe show this is to create what I call a 9-box, where you show the impact on the left side and the level of effort, right? So you're always going to have a year where it's like, hey, we got to do 30 projects, but we only have enough money for 10 projects. Which are the 10 projects we should do? And if you think about the level of effort, let's call low anything from 0 to 90 days. Let's call medium effort 90 days to a year. Let's call high effort anything over a year, right? And so now we can kind of frame how long it takes us to do something. And then the impact is really about risk reduction here. How much are we going to lower the risk to our company of material threats being exercised? And so now you may have different programs, deploy multi-factor authentication, SOC automation, bug bounty, and you can start to rank these things. And what you're going to see is these 9 boxes are not ordered sequentially. You see how it goes 1, 2, 4? This is by design. The idea being that it's better to fund 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 this order before you go over. So it's better to fund a desirable projects in box 3 than a major program. Now, does that mean we won't do major programs? Absolutely not. Like things like patch management, definitely going to take longer than a year, definitely high impact to keep your company safe. You're going to do those things. But if I have to choose between 2 programs and limited funding, sometimes I'm going to optimize on things in these lower numbers, right? Another reason why you won't always follow this box is because they may have been committed requirements. So if my auditor comes in and gives me a finding saying, hey, you don't have your test data, abstracted like test data for your QA environments, I might have put that in box 9, right? I really don't care about this thing, but I care about keeping my license. I care about operating and generating revenue for the company. And so, because of that, I am actually going to make sure these things get done, even if they're in a lower box. But this is overall a very helpful framework so you can start to figure out how to prioritize things. So, the next thing I love to do is a tools rationalization exercise I call a murder board. And this is probably one of my favorite things to do. And this is one of the biggest things CISOs make a huge mistake on. So imagine a CISO walks into a company and on day one, they go and they learn what are all the tools this company has to secure our company. And we all have our favorites. Maybe my favorite is CrowdStrike. Maybe my favorite is Proofpoint or Sentinel-1. It doesn't really matter what the tool is. But you'll go in and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they use these tools. We should just rip and replace and get to these other tools. And ultimately, what that means is you're going to have to go talk to the CFO and ask for, a couple extra million to rip and replace the tools that you have with these new desired tools. And that, I think, is the exact wrong thing to do. So what I tell people to do is let's actually figure out where the program is and figure out where things are well deployed and well implemented. And to do that, I use a couple of metrics. The first is called coverage here. And this coverage metrics is, think of a deployment. If I have a web application firewall, have I deployed it on 100% of the web applications or on 20%? Because if it's not deployed, it's not securing anything, right? Now, the second metric over here, I call utilization. It's another metric here, which is about the implementation. So imagine you have this web application firewall and it's blocking the OWASP top 10 attacks, but you actually turn off 5 of those attacks because they're too noisy or the team thinks it breaks their website. Well, if you have a WAF that you've turned off half of the WAF rules for, it's not WAFing, it's shelfware, it's vaporware, right? And so what I do is I go in and I say, well, if data loss prevention is only on 21% of the boxes, and we've only turned on, let's call it 70% of the features, we times these two together, we get something I call an effective protection score. And so now I can actually do this for every one of my applications, and I can quickly come into an organization and say, oh my gosh, why is the network firewalls only at 16%? That doesn't seem right. Like, did we just buy this tool like in the last 2 months of 2025 and that's why we haven't fully deployed it? Or is there a reason why this is a failed deployment? And then the second thing is, hey, why haven't we turned all the features on? Like, if I'm paying for a tool that's supposed to protect me and it's not protecting, that's an issue because I still pay the price of that tool. And so we start to go through and we look at all of these things. And this is a super, super valuable way where you can quickly come in and figure out how to save your company a couple $1 million on tools that are not providing the value that you think they are to protect your company. Now, just because these numbers are low, a couple things to think about. One, you still may have a regulatory requirement to do said product. So you may want to rip and replace this one vendor solution with a better vendor solution. The other thing is they may actually still be doing good things. So in this template to the right, I actually have another one like a justification. So like how many real world attacks does this thing stop from harming your company? So maybe DLP, as poor as it's deployed at 15% effectiveness, it's actually stopped 100 attacks. That tells me I probably don't want to get rid of that, but I probably want to get better at implementing and deploying that. Things like that can be super, super powerful when you start to look at it. And by the way, all of these templates that I'm showing you are completely free on CISOTradecraft.com. You can go and download and play with them. So there's no cost. It's all free. Next slide. Another thing that I find people really struggle with when we're talking about cybersecurity of how to get it funded is people don't actually understand what cybersecurity is. You guys do. You took a certification. You've been in the industry 10, 15 years. But does your head of finance, could he tell you these 20 different areas behind cybersecurity? And just think of it from your perspective. Could you go in and say, what are the 20 different functions the finance department does? So there's this education piece we have to constantly do to the other organizations in the risk committee and the C-suite if we're expecting to get funding. Because if they think they only have to fund this one thing, and we're really asking for funding on these 20 or 30 things, that's a very different understanding of why cybersecurity is so expensive, right? So this is a really, really important piece we have to go and share and constantly educate. And this list never really shrinks, right? You can just think of like AI ML security. You know, that may not have been as big 2 years ago, but now with everybody building agents and AI capabilities and LLMs, someone's got to do the security around that. And that's a new service item you're going to have to go and bill back to the business if they want to actually do these functions. So I think this is a really, really key piece of the awareness before you're going to pitch your budgets. Next slide. All right. Now, when we're going to talk about budgets, yeah. Sorry.
So question from online is, what is the website to go to for loading the templates?
Yeah. Let me just show this really, really quick here. If anybody goes to the website CISO you'll see at the top here, there's this little section called free templates. If you click that, you'll see lots of really, really helpful templates. So we're going to go over this cybersecurity budget template. There's, this murder board template that we just looked at. And I think there's like 13 something templates today. So please, please, please have fun with that. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. And feel free to stop me if you guys have questions here too, because sometimes I talk fast. But another way I think that's really important to think about cybersecurity budgets is to use this concept I call total cost of ownership. And it really came from the fact that I am not a certified public accountant who understands every piece of CapEx, OpEx, and the generally accepted accounting principles. Anybody in the room feel like they're an expert on all that? No. So I needed a way to dumb it down for me that I could do really good approximations for the cost of cyber and the cost of tools. And the way I came up with that is three simple things. What are the labor costs? Plus what are the licensing costs? Plus what are the hosting costs to create a total cost of ownership? Simple example. I want to deploy Proofpoint. I need 2 people to actually maintain that tool. So if one person leaves the company, I don't lose everything. And let's say it's 150K headcount. That means I spent 300K in labor costs. Proofpoint's going to charge me some fee. Let's say it's $100,000, right? Now I'm at $400,000. And then sometimes with tools, there's a hosting costs. You can think of this as your AWS bill or your bill for on-prem equipment, things like that. So when you add these 3 things together, you're going to get the total cost of ownership. Make sense? Pretty simple, pretty easy to understand, pretty able to use this. All right. Now let's go one step deeper before we start diving into the budget spreadsheet. Within labor costs, I also split that into 2 pieces. The first is what I would call new features, and the second is what I would call operations and maintenance. These 2 numbers need to add to 100%. So if 70% of my time is on maintenance, how much time do I have left for new feature development? 30%, right? And so these are things you can really use with time cards. If I have 10 people working on an application, what percent of their time is building new features versus maintaining the application? And this is really, really powerful because when you go and you start looking at all of your applications and figuring out which ones are the most top heavy on O&M fees, that's typically your biggest opportunities to save costs in the future through lowering that maintenance fees. So if I have an application, let's call it website XYZ, where it's at 90% O&M, and I have 10 people, and that means 9 people are just keeping that server alive. And if you times that by 150K each, now you kind of know what that value is. And what I like to do is I like to go to organizations and say, hey, I was just talking to all these engineers, and they told me if we did website version 2.0, instead of having 90% maintenance, we could actually get that down to 30% maintenance by using a serverless approach where we don't have to patch the OS, the middleware, and we get rid of all these things. And it's going to take $1 million to do this project. But think about how much we're going to save in maintenance costs every single year once we do this. And so now I have a way where I can go in and talk about reducing tech debt in a way the chief financial officer is really going to resonate with. Make sense? Yeah. Very, very cool. Next slide, please. So now that we have this, this is kind of how things start to look at a larger picture. So what I did is I just used the CIS 18, but you could have done whatever services are in your organization, GRC, identity access management, all the typical functions. And you're going to put each one of these in a row and call this a service catalog. And then you're going to go and list out what are the labor costs, the licensing costs, and the hosting costs. Combine it to get the total cost of ownership. And now when we do this, what we're also going to do is we're going to map it against what are the laws and regulations that say I have to do this thing, right? Because if, I don't do it, I probably have to wear an orange jumpsuit, and I don't look good in an orange jumpsuit, right? So this is important things to do. The other thing I also like to do is I like to put the names of my vendors here a little bit, because maybe somebody looks at this and says, Ross, oh my gosh, you're paying X amount of dollars to this vendor. You should just can that and buy this cheaper solution. Well, I'd love to, but I'm locked into a 3-year service agreement, right? And so knowing the vendors and the time frames of that really also influences when you can make financial decisions here. Any questions on this one? Yeah. Mike.
So for this for the budget part here, two issues I've had, and I'm glad you addressed the last part about how to communicate getting funds for certain applications and software, et cetera, with the CFO, because that's something I struggled with in the past. But this part's important too, because even working with the procurement team and having them understand that, what's going on, the costs and everything as well, and when it's time for it, you can be on top of it. So like something I've noticed is procurement team, even though they're just buying stuff, it's kind of evolving now where they're kind of taking that responsibility away from IT, so we can focus more on security or whatever it is. So having an understanding of that and the CFO conversation helps that overall concept of spending and why to spend. So just want to say thanks for that, and then that document as well as online. So
this one here, you're going to see the next slide that's a better version of this. But I'm just kind of prepping the wheel here a little bit. The key thing I think that you brought up is when we go and we're going to share this documents, we want to make sure it's easy to understand. But the other thing I would also say is we're trying to scope what cybersecurity does. If somebody thinks we can save every puppy around the world from anything, we can't do that. Right? We don't have infinite budgets in cybersecurity to save everything, right? I can't read every single email to make sure everybody doesn't click on every phishing attack. But what I can do is I can actually go in and say, here's the services I'm going to provide. And if it's not in these services, that's not something I'm doing. And then the leadership team knows and understands that. So if they come in and are like, well, hey, aren't you doing fraud prevention? Sorry, not on the list, right? So you're kind of going and scoping what you do. And I think that's really important because you'll never have enough budget to do everything, right? All right, next slide. So I've taken that simple, let's call it Excel spreadsheet, and then I started really playing with Google Gemini and started vibe coding and saying, how do I make this more helpful, more visually impressive? And so this is the free template that's on the website, where what you're going to be able to do is go in here and pick, all these different service categories. You'll see that labor is actually broken out between these two new features versus O&M. And then you also can put in your year 1, year 2, year 3 total cost of ownership. And so now when you go to the chief finance officer, you can go in and say, well, here's our breakdown between people costs, licensing costs, hosting costs. You know, we can start to figure out if we're maybe too top heavy on some of these maintenance activities. We can actually go in and see how this is broken out by each of our spending services and figure out where we want to, you know, increase or change numbers, right? And I think they really appreciate you having a 3-year plan. And now you can go in and say, well, here's when this license is going to change. Here's how I'm going to maybe do a vendor consolidation play and get everything on Microsoft E5, or maybe I don't like Microsoft and I'm going to split and go to best of breed vendors, and how that's going to change some of the dollars and cents here. But I think this is a really, really helpful way where we can go and look. And I think even the template got changed from this pie chart to a bar chart, so it displays a little cleaner. Next slide. Another thing I think we really miss is how to communicate to the business in a way they're going to understand. And too often we only go and we say, hey, we're in the business of risk. We're going to safeguard and keep you safe. And if you do that, it's challenging and it's difficult. Hey, last year, the company had a bad year. Our sales is 20% below where it was last year. Do you think I'm in an environment where I can go and ask for 20% more money? Probably not, right? So I need to understand which environment the business is in so that I can best tie my cybersecurity program to what they're trying to do. So look at this example right here on the left, and you're going to see there's 4 types of scenarios most organizations are in. They're trying to get a lot more customers. More customers, more revenue, good for the business. We're going to launch a brand new service or a product, which is going to create more revenue for the company. Hey, you know what? We really just want to increase our margins, right? We really want to not really launch anything new, just make more money. Or, hey, it's a really bad year. We're cutting things so we can remain profitable. Make sense, the 4 different categories here? All right. Now, depending on these 4 categories is how we're going to approach the security services we're selling so that it's aligned to where the business is. If the business is trying to reach more customers, we need to have a program that secures the customer experience, right? How do we have MFA? How do we have secure customer portals, things like that, that they're going to value and appreciate? If they're going to be launching a brand new service or brand new product, that's going to come with risks. So we got to do the red team assessments, the pen tests, all the security scans on those new things to make sure they're not going to have problems when they go internet facing. If they're worried about profit generation here, right? Think of like Capital One, big bank. What do they make most of their money on? Credit cards. They don't want that credit card to go down. So here I need to have this operational resilience testing on the credit card platforms. Can it fail over from the primary site to the data to the backup site? Can I make sure that it has high availability? It can survive ransomware. We can quickly redeploy everything from a vaulted backup. Things like that are really important when you care about protecting your crown jewels. Or if they're really worried about cost reduction, well, this is where we're going to look at what are our things that are costing us the most on maintenance activities, this tech debt, because that's where we can free up some of these opportunities. Does this give you more options when you're trying to figure out how to align with the business? Yeah. Very cool. Next slide. Now, we've talked about some of the ways we're going to align our activities. We talked ways how we're going to create a service catalog. How do we actually want to pitch it to the chief financial officer in our budget meetings? I like to think of this like buying a car. Anybody bought a car recently? Okay. Well, when you go to buy a car, what do they show you? They give you like, here's the various trim or levels. There's this I don't know, the base model, here's the nice model, and here's the premium model. You know, you can think of this as like, here's the Honda Civic, here's the Honda Accord, here's the Honda Odyssey, or maybe it's the Teslas that you like. But it makes sense when you go and you say, for 5 million, I'm going to give you everything on the essential services. But if you look at it, here's the headcount I have, and this is what I'm giving you here. But if we have more money, what I'm really going to do is spend it on a bug bounty program and external maturity assessments, because this is something our customers are asking for. And if I have even more money, these are the things I'm going to add for AI security and automated ransomware response and those things. And then you give them 3 options and they get to have a discussion and figure out what they're going to do. Now, if they pick option 1 or number 2, we also have them sign off on the risk side that says, I am choosing not to fund these activities here because I'm constrained by budget. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with saying, we don't think we need to pay for these activities. But who owns the risk when we don't fund these activities? Is it cyber? No, it's the business. And if the business says we really need to save whatever, $1.5 million so that we can fund this new marketing program or this new sales initiative, that may be the total right call for the company. We just want to make sure we're documenting why we're not doing these things. So in 6 months later, when AI security becomes a nightmare and says, well, why didn't we do this? We can say, we made a business decision to do this, and here's why, right? Next slide. Another way to really tell the story in a way that lands well with the leadership team is to put it in terms that they understand. And I'll just give you an example. Let's say we want to fund a SOC 2. We can go in and we can say, hey, 300 of our customers are actually asking us to have a SOC 2 during their third-party risk assessments. On top of that, it costs us $30,000 to go and do this initiative. And so if we look at this, it's only $100 per customer. That's not that bad for customer acquisition costs. But what's really more telling is this bottom piece. Those 300 customers actually generate $30 million of revenue. Are we really willing to put $30 million of revenue at risk for only 30K? I don't think any chief financial officer is going to say no to that, right? And so here, this is a more impactful way to kind of go and tell from a sales, from a revenue side of why cyber is important, right? You can tie this to compliance very, very well, very, very nicely. Any questions on this one? No? All right. I think this is actually my last slide. So I'm going to open it up here to questions for everybody, and hopefully everybody gets a good chance to go and learn a lot more about this. If you're wanting to play with more of these templates, like I said, if you just go to CISOTradecraft.com, you can download, or I mean, you can actually go and play with any of these templates. Or you can check out my book that I have if you're curious to just learn more about it. But at this point in time, I'll just go back and take questions from anybody who might have a question. Oh, yeah. So let me just drive a little bit here on there it is. So if you go to the CISOTradecraft.com website, the thing that's really valuable here is there's so many people I know who are like, how do I get smarter in cybersecurity? And who here has a crappy commute in their car driving to work? Anybody have like a 30-hour-long commute? Anybody? Yeah? Oh, you guys are lucky, man. I've had some hour-long commutes every day for years in DC. Oh my goodness. If you go in here, you'll notice this other little section called episodes. And in here, what we've done is we have categorized 5 years of episodes of teaching people how to build an AppSec program, how to do security culture, how to do GRC, all of these things. So if you ever maybe spend all your time in the SOC, you're like, I don't really need to learn the SOC. I'm good. But you know what? I know nothing about GRC and I'm going to step into a GRC role for the first time. You can go and quickly like dive into 2 episodes. And so there's all these different ones. So it's like, hey, I just really want to get better at the soft skills, how to read your boss, how to have executive presence, how to have effective meetings, all of those things. And it just kind of keeps going down from, hey, I want to learn about detection and response or AI capabilities or any of these things that are out there. So another great free resource if anybody just wants to learn in their spare time while they're exercising or driving or any of that. Awesome. Okay. So that's it. That's all that I have today. I hope everybody has learned something new. Any other questions?
Check, check. Uh, Between like corporate and government, is there a lot of difference as your goals in cybersecurity or CFO responsibilities?
Absolutely huge difference. So, for example, the financial sector, one of the most audited, one of the most regulated sectors you will ever be in. You know what that means? You do a lot of compliance. And that means you do a lot of you might be surprised that 50% of your budget are on compliance activities that do nothing to actually secure your company. Right? So, and I'll just give you the classic example. Every company does third-party risk management today. Does third-party risk management actually secure our company? Let me give you a very specific question. Last year, if you were to go and look at every single company that had a major breach in 2024 or 2025, would something in your third-party risk management process have said, do not do business with this company? If it isn't, now you're just doing a checkbox. And so this is why I think it's really important to say, is this a compliance activity where I do this checkbox as cheap as possible? Or is this something that, hey, if I absolutely would find all these things and say, don't do business with them, then that's really powerful. That's a risk reduction piece. I think most people would say third-party risk management is more on the compliance side. That is perfectly okay. Tell me why. I'd love to hear more about third-party risk
I
management
would be happy
programs.
to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So third-party risk management, I think, yes, a lot of times it is a check the box for many organizations and many cybersecurity leaders and teams. It should not be, because your company could get in a lot of trouble that can cause some serious financial pain, like an attack that's caused by a third party that's not doing the right things. So I don't think it's a check the box. It should not be a check the box if you're doing it properly. And I've seen and learned the hard way of what the consequences can be if a company does not have strong third party risk. I can give you an example at my prior company. So I was the CISO at Callaway for a long time, 10 years. We acquired a company. This is all public information. So we acquired a company, Travis Matthew, who was like a startup retail company. They're in Huntington Beach. They outsourced all of their development for their e-com site. And they were a victim of a Mage card attack in 2018, right after we acquired them. So when we acquired them, our CEO said, leave them alone. Their business is booming. They're doing something right, but they didn't have the proper controls in place, including third-party risk management. And they paid the consequences, or we did. But yeah, it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I disagree. I politely disagree.
No, I think it's good that we have conversations. Like at the end of the day, if there's something a company is doing that is catching ransomware or preventative things that I don't do at my company, I want to learn those lessons so I can bring that to my company. Right. So I think your example of
But they were outsourcing controls to the third party who didn't have proper security controls in place, which resulted in a major data breach.
Okay.
It's pretty simple. So if you don't have good third party risk, that's one example of many. But I mean, look at the Target breach in 2014. Same thing, right? It was their HVAC systems, third party.
Yeah, I think the hard thing is, are your third-party questionnaires, pen tests, all of those things going to give you that level of insight to actually know this is what to avoid? I think it's a tough thing.
Not
I think,
always, but if you do a thorough job and you really review them with scrutiny and you go back to the third parties and you do your due diligence and you ask the right questions, maybe. But I do think nowadays, I mean, I used to issue a lot of SOC 2 reports, and in many cases, the way that the attestations work for SEC, they're very check the box. They aren't as thorough as they used to be. So you won't always catch things.
yeah.
And those third party, I mean, like I know where our third party questionnaires started when I joined Callaway in 2015 to where they were when I left in 2024. They were much more, the program was much more robust at the time I left. And we said no to plenty of third parties that like our marketing team wanted to work with because it wasn't safe.
Sounds like that's a good third party.
I'm a little
Ground.
passionate about this, and I'm a little passionate about GRC. So
Thank you. I think that's helpful. I think it's helpful to have a good debate over these things.
I have a question,
Yeah.
if that's okay, unless there's any online. Go for it.
Luis, the mic is yours.
Me? Oh, wow. How is that? I'm not used to being called upon. Uh, yeah, I mean, two things. First of all, Emily, I agree 100%. I mean, what we see out there, third-party risk, just a huge culprit of generating risk in general for cybersecurity. So I do agree with you. There should not be a compliance. But my question was more about in the investment equation, when you are doing things that will bring benefits in the future with the mindset that is assigned to cybersecurity about kind of firefighting of today, so kind of a paranoid profession. How do you recommend, or do you have any advice on how to get investment approved that is not going to remediate things today, but actually, hopefully, limit your budget requirements and increases because of good hygiene in the future? That kind of more post, longer term time horizon investment portfolio. It seems like everything we do is about defending someone that's in the house and less about not leaving keys in the park with our address and when we're out for lunch kind of thing. How do we address that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good piece. There's certainly a lot of things we do as good hygiene and good, let's say, vulnerability security assessments, where we're going to figure out what are the holes in our organization that we need to go in and fix. And there's some value in that, right? If this is going to create $30 million of revenue to our company, spending $300K on that to making sure that that system is robust, is operationally resilient, probably makes a lot of sense for our organization. So I think it's not about, hey, here's 300K that we're spending in our cyber program, but it's 300K that's actually tied to something that the mission really cares about in the company. And when you tie it into that, like that, I think is the piece that gets the business to really say, I care about this mission and I'm willing to do, put brakes on a car to keep the car going, right? All right. Sounded like you might have had another question.
Yeah. So I was curious. I think a lot of our members that are in the room and online are not in leadership roles and much earlier in their careers. So I imagine they don't, and I'm speaking for people in the room. So please correct me if you disagree, but I imagine a lot of this is not what they see in their day-to-day jobs, and they're not responsible for budgeting and forecasting and meeting with the CFO. So for those folks and attendees today, what things would you recommend they consider, knowing now what the big picture looks like when it comes to cybersecurity budgets? How can they potentially help their leaders? How can this impact their jobs? I mean, obviously there may be fewer headcount and budget for pay increases and things like that. But I guess how can we translate what you spoke about today and what you've written about in your book to those folks that are in the meeting with us.
Yeah. So what I would do is I would maybe go back to some of these slides here where I'm showing how to make the business case of things. Like here's the cybersecurity budget, or particularly just one thing like the SOC 2. So maybe I'm not the CISO today, but I own the vuln management program. I want to make sure I can break down that vuln management program into a mini service catalog behind that. And I want to have a couple of slides like these prepped at any point in time, because usually there's things like use or lose money, right? Where, hey, you got to spend this money before the end of December or the end of your fiscal year. And if you have something where you can quickly allocate 500K, that's really valuable. And the tricky thing that comes up is the master service license agreement process in a company. So at Caterpillar, to bring in a new vendor, that might have been a 9-month process. But if you've already prepped it and you got that vendor through your master service license agreement, now you can quickly sign a contract in less than a month. So thinking about ways where you can kind of prep things, so then when the user lose money comes and you can allocate versus everyone else is stuck going through a 9-month procurement process, that's the difference between your project getting funded versus your project sitting in dead water with the rest of them, right? So some of these are ways where you can start to just say, how do I want to be positioned to win when funding comes up because somebody saved it or someone didn't spend it somewhere else?
Yeah, another to add on to that, one thing that I used to recommend to my team, and I recommend to a lot of folks that I mentor, is your cybersecurity leader, or if you're an IT, your IT leader, like they have to go forward with these budget requests for major projects, new tools, software, so on and so forth. But when it's something net new, they have to make a business case for it. So my team would always come to me and they wanted everything, right? They're like, oh, we really need this. We really need that. There's a risk here. And I said, okay, great. I wanted to involve them in the process. In procurement contracts, like there's no reason most of the time they're not going to get involved in that. But what I would talk to them about is like, listen, I'm going to have to go meet with our CFO and make a business case for why we need this. And I could use your help to articulate what the ROI is going to be, right? How is this going to add value to our company? What risk is it going to address? Like, will it help us save money somewhere else? And so, using the expertise of the engineers, the architects who are going to be the ones using and implementing these tools, I think that gets them more involved in the budgeting and contracts process. And it helps, hopefully, prepare them to move into a leadership position eventually, because then they get more visibility into what goes into that.
Yeah.
But they won't be actually doing the contracts or having the conversation with the CFO, but they can help their leader prepare for that.
And one way I would maybe think about it is behind every tool, I know I showed you that cybersecurity murder board, maybe just think of a metric. Like, how do I know this tool is getting the value this month, or we're getting more mature in our deployment of this tool, right? And you might just think of, hey, we're at 50% and now we're at 70%. How do you measure the effectiveness of this? Especially if you can talk about how we're going to measure this tool before we actually buy the tool. That can be a really good way to get that team involved. Any other hands there? Yeah.
So this question is from Matt Stamper. Name may sound familiar. And that is that, is there a huge value to using, key risk indicators or KRIs to address coverage issues with tools and applications?
I think key risk indicators are hugely important. One of the things that I also like to look at here, and I'll just kind of go over to my slides that I always go in these templates, is something I've created called the OWASP threat and safeguard matrix. And in here, what you can do is you can go in and put different types of threats, and then you might put in what are the different types of tools that give you this defense in depth approach to protecting your company. And behind each of these, you would have different key risk indicators where you would show how many attacks this stopped last month, last year. I think those are really, really valuable, because sometimes the best way to show the value of the tool is the number of real world attacks it stopped. Because if they think of, hey, we only got attacked 10 times, I expect you to stop 10 attacks. But if we got attacked 20 million times, now if 3 get by, it's not nearly as bad as if 3 get by out of 10 attacks, right? So helping them just understand how much under threat organizations are, I think is really important. So I'm a big fan of KRIs. All right, we're probably at time or yeah. Oh, good.
Go ahead.
Oh, hi, I'm glad to see Matt Stamper is here. He will agree with me. Matt, this is Farah. I think cybersecurity can learn a lesson from operational excellence. I come from an operational excellence background into cybersecurity, and I see so much waste around, and it's very hard to watch. Just a simple thing as knowing your inventory. I speak about that. I teach people about inventory. And we are so wrapped up in conversations like, are you technical? Are you not technical? And not think about, you got to know your inventory if you're going to protect it. You got to know what you have.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it. So I think there is a lesson there in operational excellence, and we're definitely missing that in cybersecurity. And I do agree with GRC is very important. Knowing I also work in GRC, so absolutely third-party risk management from the supply chain risk is huge, and it's real. Think about four risk from fourth parties. So that's just something to think about for all of us is how do we ensure that we are getting rid of the waste that is very visible in our environments, but we're so wrapped up in, yes, budgeting conversations are very important, but it's more than that. We got to go deep to protect our inventories and our environments.
Yeah, I love this concept. I mean, if you look at CIS, I think in their top 18, the thing that they really showed people was the top most essential controls are not pen testing. It's getting an accurate software inventory, getting an accurate hardware inventory before you do the other things, because you're just going to pay a lot of expensive pen tests when they find things that your basic security tools could have found if they were just covering them. I'm going to share another template. Hopefully you're not getting too bored of these. I think you'll really like this one. This is one I call the process improvement exercise. And it's one you do not have to be technical in, but it can actually save you a lot of time, money, and effort. And so take any process in an organization. What we're going to do is take a process and break it down into the steps, right? So if you just think about vulnerability management, there's actually like 15 different steps in vulnerability management. Maybe a tool like Qualys has to scan it. Then we have to actually assign it to the right owner. Then we have to make sure it's not a false positive, and all the steps until we actually pushed out the patch and verified it worked and had a clean scan afterwards. And what we can do is we can look at each step and create like an average time. On average, how long does this step take? And then we can get, let's call it a council of the smart nerds in our company, where you get someone from the database team and someone from the network team and someone from the server team and someone from the apps team, and say, hey, in a perfect world, if we were to redesign this step that takes X amount of minutes, how fast could we get it to if we built version 2.0 of this thing? And now what we're going to see is maybe we went from scanning every 2 hours to scanning every 10 minutes. Or maybe it was 10 minutes to 8 minutes, or 2,000 minutes to 10 minutes. And so now what I can start to do is I can look through this process, and I actually use a Pareto chart, that 80-20 principle, where I can go in and I can start to look at and figure out of all these 15 steps, what are the 2 steps that are slowing this process like a bottleneck more than any others? Perform regression testing and passing change approvals. And now if I make an enterprise initiative to just fix those 2 steps, I don't have to fix all 15, which would take a lot more time and resources. So this is like another really cool way where we can use some of this like Lean Six Sigma process improvement kung fu into our role in cyber, and you don't have to be technical, right? So lots of free, cool templates you guys can go and tinker with on the CISO Tradecraft website there. Yeah, I just give them away free. It's my way to give back to the community.
Okay. Yeah, I just kind of an observation, and yeah, I want to throw more gas on the third party thing that we were talking about. And I'd appreciate it, other people's feedback on what I wanted to share, where I would take the position that I think you're both accurate and I think you're both correct in a way. Where I think, Ross, you were coming from it from a perspective of, if you're in that position, what is the overall risk related to the third party risk management program that you're running? And you prioritize it in that way. And what Emily's sharing is that when there was an acquisition taking place, when the CEO said, oh, hands off, just let them keep doing what they're doing, that could have opened up multiple attack vectors. And the one that ended up getting exploited was the third party. So there's an issue in where it was allowed to not have due diligence on the M&A. And in that scenario, third party risk management very well probably just in a light due diligence, it would have surfaced how immature that was or how inappropriate it was, and that's what it led to. So I think that that's why I say I think you're both correct. And Brian and I talk about it all the time. Every scenario is going to be unique, and you're going to and the skill that a leader needs to have in those scenarios is that ability to understand these principles and how you apply them into that particular scenario to overall manage risk as best as possible.
Yeah, I think it's really key. What I saw was a lot of companies, if you say, hey, what's your third party risk management program look like? We're going to send a vendor the full Cloud Security Alliance cake of a couple hundred questions. I want pen tests. I want to see all your cybersecurity policies. I want to see a clean SOC 2 and this kind of litany of information. And then what I saw was it almost came back clean, or there were just like 5 trivial items. Like, we don't have a SOC 2 type 2, but we do all these things. And we were just approving them almost anyways, because the business would just accept the risk on the company. So it felt like a lot of check work. And I don't know if I would have caught any of the breaches, because they would have had a clean SOC 2 and a clean pen test, and they could have been dirty in the inside just lying to me, right? So, and the other thing I always thought was a little weird were
If you have something, if your contracts are written properly and they are lying, they can be held accountable.
That's right.
So
I think it's a good thing. If you find ways that are finding risk in your suppliers, that's amazing. Do more of that thing. If you find the things that you're doing is more security theater, do less of that thing unless it's legally required.
Yeah, and even if you're building out the program, identifying which third parties bring the greatest risk and focus on those first.
Yeah. All right.
We have another online question, and this is from Jonathan Bochinsky. I hope I'm getting your name right. And that is regarding the murder board utilization column. Some tools come with many features that are not useful, or at best only marginally reduce risk compared to other features in the same tool that significantly reduce risk. In your experience, how do you handle quantifying that into a single utilization percentage score?
So the first thing I would say is, who's going to know the best way to configure the tool? The vendor, right? The one selling you the tool should know more about the tool than anybody else on that tool. And so I would go to them and say, what are the most important features you would recommend every customer turn on? And then that's probably the features there that should be in your list. And when you have issues where like this is just creating a ton of noise, that's when you kind of have to go back to that vendor and say, I'm getting a ton of noise from your tool. Is there a way you can tune it, make it better, as part of that customer advisory piece back to the vendor? So I wouldn't go to my engineers to come up with that criteria. I would have them go out to the vendor and then say, okay, the vendor told me I have to do these 10 things. How much of these 10 things are we currently doing? All right. Well, it's been a pleasure to connect. I'm Ross Young. I'm on LinkedIn if anybody wants to connect. And then also please check out some of the materials from CISO Tradecraft. There's the free templates, the free podcast, or you can buy my book if you guys are so inclined. But thank you again for letting me share my time here.